So crossing over, as we can see here, essentially they swap the ends of their chromosomes. So again, this is even more shuffling that goes on. The reasons for this shuffling are, there's some fairly good theories as to why this shuffling happens. One reason is essentially that it's a way of, humans reproduce very infrequently. We maybe get a new generation of humans every 18, 20 years, then you need to grow up and have babies. So we reproduce fairly infrequently, which means that we can't benefit much from the effects of mutations changing our DNA. So we're not evolving very quickly. The problem is there's plenty of organisms which do evolve very quickly because they reproduce extremely rapidly. These are things like viruses and bacteria. So it's been suggested that the reason why sex evolved is in order to try and keep up with bacteria which are reproducing themselves and getting new variants which might potentially kill us. So sex evolved as a way of resisting parasites and introducing variation which causes humans to change much more rapidly as a result of all this genetic shuffling that's going on here. So let's talk about something else to do with illness, which is heterozygous advantage. People with one copy of a so-called toxic gene can benefit. Now we saw with Huntington's that one copy of a toxic gene doesn't benefit the individual, but sickle cell anemia, which I mentioned earlier, actually is a disease which is a recessive disease, which means you need two sickle cell genes to have the disease. And the question is, well, why is this gene still around? Why are people suffering from disorder? Because if you get two copies of the gene, then what you can see here is that your blood corpuscles, the red blood cells, have a kind of squished banana shape, which means that they kind of block the blood vessels. They don't smoothly flow through the blood vessels, which means that the individuals often suffer pain, weakness, breathlessness, kidney damage, mental retardation caused by development. But what's the advantage? I'm talking about heterozygous advantage. What's the advantage here? Well, remember, sickle cell anemia you only get sickle cell anemia if you have two copies of the sickle cell gene. What happens if you have one? Well, before I answer the question, let's look at this quick picture here. You may be able to answer it yourself. The blue here is the relative frequency of sickle cell gene or allele. Allele is just a word for a gene variant. So we have a sickle cell allele and a normal allele, just like we have a blue-eyed allele and a brown-eyed allele. It's just basically the copies of the gene which can exist at a particular place on the chromosome. So high frequencies, 10 to 20%, you can see here. Now, if we look, overlay that with a map which shows the existence of malaria. This is Malaria falciparum, again in Africa. There's a fairly good match, and one of the hypotheses here is that actually sickle cell people who have a single copy of the sickle cell gene have a certain resistance to malaria. They're much less likely to die from malaria than people who have normal copies of the gene. So the advantage is, the heterozygous advantage is, if you're heterozygous for a recessive gene, which in this case is the sickle cell gene, you're more likely to survive and reproduce than if you have the normal gene. So if we look here, mum and dad, again, sperm, we've got, remember that this is a normal gene here, the lowercase r is the recessive gene, which is the sickle cell gene. So mum and dad are both heterozygous for the sickle cell gene. So both of these individuals have a certain resistance to malaria, whereas this individual here is if you quotes and quotes, normal, like I guess most of us who don't carry the disease. This person, although healthy, will be more susceptible to malaria, whereas these two people are normal, but they have a resistance to malaria because they have two copies of the gene, and this person has the disease. So you can see there's actually a 2-to-1 advantage of having a single cell sickle cell gene. So there's a 2-to-1 advantage opposed with the malaria resistance versus the person who has sickle cell. So that's why sickle cell anemia happens. The benefit is when you're heterozygous for it, and that outweighs the smaller number of people who have the debilitating condition. So 1 in 4 will suffer from the disease, but 2 in 4 will benefit from having the gene. So this is a benefit from the disease. They won't benefit from the disease. 1 in 4 will suffer from the disease by having 2 copies of the gene. 2 in 4 will benefit by having 1 copy of the disease. So this is heterozygous advantage. This is why certain genetic diseases refuse to go away, because they may be harmful when they're paired up with other genes in a small number of people, and that's when we notice it as a disease. But in combinations with other genes in other people, they might be producing an advantage. 3 other points that are important to make here, I think. Many traits are polygenic. Now, we've looked at disorders there which seem to be caused by single genes, sickle cell, Huntington's, and also, well, not disorders, but things like eye colour. But most traits are caused by more than one gene. Things such as skin colour, intelligence, personality, and so on. More than one gene affects us. Almost certainly disorders such as schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. It's not a single gene for schizophrenia or anxiety. There's no doubt a multiple combination of genes. The second thing is genes exhibit a property called pleiotropy, meaning that one gene can have more than one effect. Okay, so it's not the case, it's not a one-to-one mapping between a gene causes a particular trait. Sometimes that's true, but PKU, which is a developmental disorder, which is caused by a particular gene, that single gene has an effect on cognitive function, which is what it's principally known for, but it also has effects on hair growth, skin pigmentation, and so on. The point about this, an important point about this, is sometimes people say, oh, pleiotropy, sometimes people say, oh, what we should do is we should, if we can change a gene maybe and modify a gene in some way, we can get rid of the disorder. This is so-called gene therapy. The problem with that is that changing a gene might have multiple negative effects on other parts of the body. So it can be a tricky thing sometimes. The final thing is that genes or their products can interact with one another, and a gene can act differently depending on which other genes are around it. Okay, so it's a kind of important point in that a gene doesn't exist in a vacuum. As I kind of already mentioned this, that a gene can be really good with certain genes and provide an advantage when it's with a certain set of genes, but with a different set of genes, that gene can cause a genetic disease. A bit like sickle cell. Okay, I will pause this now and I will come back and talk about behavioural genetics in the next video.